journey begins.
Have you ever wondered how humans survive in places colder than Mars? Not with heated boots or NASA-grade fabrics, but with hand-stitched fur, bone needles, and wisdom passed down over 1,000 years. In the frozen north, the Inuit didn't just endure winter, they outsmarted it. And what they created wasn't just clothing. It was a survival system so effective it humbles everything modern science has built since. The real question isn't how they did it, it's why the rest of the world never paid attention. To understand how Inuit people survive the coldest places on Earth, you have to start with one thing: fur. But not just any fur. Caribou fur is nature's elite insulation, a biological marvel. Each hair is hollow. Think of it like this: microscopic straws, creating a barrier of warm air around the body. It's what lets the caribou survive wind chills of -70 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's what Inuit people transform into survival gear more effective than most modern tech. But they didn't just wear fur, they engineered it. Traditional Inuit parkas are made from 2 separate layers of caribou hide, one worn with the fur facing inward, the other outward. This layering creates a microclimate, an inner chamber of warm air sealed from wind, snow, and moisture. In modern terms, it's the equivalent of a breathable Gore-Tex shell over a down-insulated liner, but with zero synthetics, no zippers, and no environmental waste. And here's the kicker. A 1970 study by anthropologist Jill Oakes found that Inuit double-layer caribou clothing kept test subjects thermally stable at -50 degrees Fahrenheit, even during movement and moisture exposure. Try that with your $800 ski jacket. But performance wasn't the only consideration. Every piece of fur was sourced with respect. Caribou weren't hunted in excess. The skin was scraped, softened, and smoked over hours. Sinew, pulled from tendons, became the thread. And while each piece of fur offered warmth, it also told a story, a mother's hands stitching through the night. A season's worth of effort worn on a hunter's back. A garment is built not just to survive, but to protect legacy. The clothing wasn't a product, it was a relationship. And maybe that's what separates Inuit design from everything else. It wasn't just solving the problem of the cold, it solved the problem of living well inside it. But even the warmest fur is useless if the wind finds a way in. And that's where the real magic begins, in a stitch you've probably never heard of, using thread no one sells in stores. A coat made of the warmest fur on Earth is useless if it's sewn wrong. Because in the Arctic, cold doesn't just seep in, it hunts for gaps. And the Inuit understood something that modern gear still gets wrong. It's not just about what you wear, it's how it's made. Their stitching wasn't decorative, it was insulation. Threads weren't made from cotton or polyester. They came from sinew, long fibers pulled from the tendons of caribou or seals. Why sinew? Because it's both strong and flexible, and unlike modern thread, it shrinks as it dries, pulling seams tighter. That means every stitch creates a seal. No gaps, no cold bridges, no weak spots. These stitches weren't machine-made either. They were hand-sewn using bone or ivory needles. Machines punch holes straight through fabric, creating microscopic highways for cold air. Inuit sewing avoids this by using overlapping techniques, often with angled seams that deflect wind instead of letting it slice in. Every seam placement had a purpose: to redirect moisture away from the body, to reduce friction at joints, to double layer where the body loses heat fastest. The result? A completely sealed thermal envelope, a suit of armor designed not in labs but around fires, passed from mother to daughter, hunter to apprentice. It's easy to miss this detail if you're looking for logos or labels. But stitch by stitch, this clothing becomes a fortress. And if you ask the elders, they'll tell you the first thing a hunter learns isn't how to track seals, it's how to sew. Because if your seams fail, you don't get a second chance. What most people miss is that Inuit garments weren't just sewn, they were engineered. Take the inset sleeve, for example, a curved seam where the arm joins the body. It seems small, but that curve allows for better movement while sealing warmth, especially in the shoulder where many jackets leak heat. Or consider the circular hood seam, sewn to follow the contour of the head. This design reduces drag from the wind and helps maintain warmth around the neck, one of the highest heat loss areas in the body. They even reinforced critical seams around elbows, knees, and shoulders with double stitching or taped sinew wraps to prevent wear over time. These weren't aesthetic details, they were survival redundancies. Stitching also followed anatomical logic. Garments were shaped to hug the body, eliminating air pockets. Seams flowed with the body's motion, not against it. And curved back seams allowed hunters to crouch, twist, and run without breaking the thermal envelope. It's easy to forget that every stitch line was measured against centuries of trial and error. These weren't patterns in the Pinterest sense, they were calibrated systems, learned by watching what made people live or freeze. And when you look closely, you'll see something else. Tiny visual differences, an extra tuck here, a longer panel there. Not just functional, but personal signatures. A way to say, "My mother taught me this." A way to carry legacy on your back, not in stories, but in seams. So next time you zip up a parka, ask yourself, would your jacket hold up at -50 if you had to stitch it yourself? Because the Inuit didn't just make clothing, they built survival systems with a needle and thread. And yet, even perfect seams can't save you if your sweat turns to ice. Which brings us to one of the most counterintuitive survival truths. In the Arctic, sweating can kill you faster than freezing. It sounds backwards. But in the Arctic, getting too warm can be more dangerous than getting too cold. You'd think freezing is the biggest threat, but ask anyone who's lived through it and they'll tell you sweat is the killer. Imagine this. It's midday on the tundra. A hunter is dragging a heavy quajak, a sealskin boat, across a snowfield. He's miles from camp. His layers are thick, his hood pulled tight. The sky is clear. The sun reflects off the snow, doubling the brightness. He's not thinking about sweating. He's thinking about making it back before the winds turn, but as his body pushes harder, his core heats up. Sweat forms, first under his arms, then down his back, but out here there's no evaporation. That sweat begins to freeze inside his clothing, and when moisture freezes in extreme cold, it's not just uncomfortable, it's destructive. Tiny ice crystals form inside the fur lining. They flatten the hairs, breaking the air pockets that once trapped warmth. The insulation collapses, and now, instead of a thermal barrier, he's wearing a freezer bag. Wet fabric in Arctic conditions doesn't just stop insulating, it multiplies heat loss. Scientific studies show that soaked fabric can conduct heat away from the body 25 times faster than dry material. And that's not even the worst part. That same warmth trapped inside the parka, the air you want to keep cozy, becomes a breeding ground. Warm, moist, dark, the perfect ecosystem for bacteria. Inuit people understood this long before science gave it a name. A single scratch from a bone tool, a crack in dry skin, could become a serious infection if not managed. In an environment where there's no pharmacy, no antibiotics, no second chances, hygiene wasn't just a ritual, it was armor. So how did they fight back? Not with detergent or high-tech wicking fabrics, but through design logic. Inuit garments were more than warm. They were thermally intelligent. They incorporated vent flaps under the arms, loose cuffs that could be untied when working, even hoods that could be adjusted based on activity level. These weren't add-ons. They were built-in tools for regulating heat and humidity without sacrificing protection. And here's something even more brilliant. If an Inuit hunter expected to sweat, say during a long haul or when constructing an igloo, they would rotate garments throughout the day. Mid-layer damp? Swap it. outer layer stiff with frost, turn it inside out, and let it breathe during rest. Everything was modular. Everything could adapt, because the principle wasn't stay warm at all costs. It was stay dry or pay the price. And that principle was drilled into daily life. A mother might gently scold her child for tightening their parka too early in the day. An elder might tap your arm and say, "Listen, your breathing's too fast. You're heating up." These weren't random habits. They were lessons passed down in silence, through gestures, through routine. Because sweat could mean a cracked parka. A cracked parka could mean frostbite. And frostbite, well, you only need to see it once. So when you see an Inuit hunter pausing mid-journey, kneeling, adjusting their hood, that's not rest. That's maintenance, a silent ritual to prevent catastrophe. Because in the Arctic, you don't just wear one thing, you orchestrate layers. Each one plays a role: breathability, retention, and ventilation. A mistake in that system doesn't make you uncomfortable, it makes you vulnerable. But what's even more surprising, these layers weren't just functional. They followed rules. Rules of material logic, energy balance, and anatomical flow. The Inuit weren't just layering clothes, they were composing a living machine. So how do you design a wearable ecosystem using nothing but animal skins, sinew, and snow? That's where the genius of layering really begins. In the West, we talk about layering like it's a checklist. Base layer, mid-layer, outer shell. Done. But for the Inuit, layering wasn't a checklist. It was a language. Each layer had a voice, a function, a rhythm. The inner layer, usually made from caribou fur worn with the hair inward, wasn't just for warmth. It absorbed sweat. It protected the skin. And it maintained a dry interior microclimate even while the body worked hard. The outer layer, worn with fur facing outward, became a windbreaker, a snow deflector, a second skin that flexed with movement, not against it. But here's what makes it genius. These weren't layers you wore all day. Inuit people rotated garments like a pilot trims a plane. Constantly, precisely. A hunter might wear 3 layers at dawn. By mid-morning, he'd peel off one, hang it inside the sled, and rotate the other 2. If sweat collected on the back, he'd flip the garment, letting frost form on the outside, a natural drying loop. In the evening, he might reverse the order entirely, putting a once inner layer on the outside, hardened with frozen moisture to shield the wind. This wasn't improvisation, it was operating a thermal machine. And the most remarkable part? There was no single formula. Every person is layered differently, based on age, size, condition, and even personality. Children ran hotter. Elders needed more protection. And everyone learned, through failure, through frostbite, through family, how to tune their own system. These weren't outfits. These were living systems maintained through ritual. Before a journey, an elder might sit silently, fingers running over seams, checking tension. A mother might hand her daughter a fresh sinew thread, not to sew, but to carry, in case she needed to resew a cuff during travel. Layering wasn't about fashion, it was control. Control over temperature, over sweat, over movement, over fear. And at its heart, there was a principle modern gear still fails to replicate: balance over brute force. Because in the Arctic, you don't fight the cold, you coexist with it. And when that balance is perfect, when your layers breathe, protect, and adapt, the clothing doesn't feel like clothing anymore. It feels like instinct. But some garments go even further. Some aren't just systems for survival. They're systems for life. And if you've never seen the amounti, prepare to meet the only coat in history designed to keep 2 hearts warm at once. Every great design solves a problem. But what do you design when the stakes aren't just your life, but your child's? Meet the amounti, a parka unlike any other. Because it doesn't just protect the person wearing it, It protects the next generation inside the garment itself. To the untrained eye, it looks oversized, a bit bulky, but look closer, and you'll see something extraordinary. Built into the back of the parka is a spacious curved pouch, soft-lined, shaped for security, thermally sealed. It's where a mother carries her baby, nestled against her back, skin to skin, with her own body warmth acting as a living incubator. No stroller, no carrier, no separate layer. The child lives inside the garment, and the design logic here is brilliant. The pouch's shape isn't rectangular, it's dome-like, echoing the curve of an igloo. This allows warm air to circulate gently around the baby's head and back. The top of the amounti features an extended hood, large enough to pull over both mother and child in harsh winds, forming a double seal. But here's where it gets even smarter. A series of drawstrings and toggles run along the waist and shoulders. With a single hand, a mother can adjust the baby's position, lift them up, shift them to the front, or slide them out to nurse, all without exposing either of them to the air. The system is designed for movement. The pouch is suspended so it doesn't jostle when walking. The garment's center of gravity remains balanced, and pressure points are distributed across the hips and shoulders. This isn't just maternal instinct, it's biomechanics. The amounti was the first wearable technology that solved shared thermal regulation, dynamic carrying ergonomics, zero failure protection for an infant. Modern baby-wearing systems try to do this with mesh, foam, and buckles. But none achieve the elegant full-body integration of the amounti, and it wasn't mass-produced. Each amounti was handmade, often by the mother herself or by women in the community who had worn one before. Patterns were passed down, not through books, but by memory and ritual. Stitch lengths, hood curvature, pouch dimensions, these weren't guesses. They were calibrated through generations of use. And like all Inuit clothing, the amounti wasn't just functional, it was symbolic. Embroidered edges, beaded cuffs, dyed accents. These weren't decorations, they were identity. A mother might bead a specific color or symbol into the seam. A silent blessing, a way to say, you were carried with care. And years later, that same child might wear an amounti for their own. This is what modern design often forgets, that the best clothing isn't just made for life, it's made with life in mind. The amounti didn't just carry a child, it carried history. It taught that survival is never solo, that warmth is a shared responsibility, and that in the coldest places on earth, love is a design system too. We tend to think of the body's core as the priority in cold, but ask anyone who's spent a winter outside. If your feet fail, you fail. Wet feet, numb toes, frostbitten arches. Your mobility goes, your focus fades, your survival window shrinks. That's why the Inuit treated footwear not as accessory, but as critical infrastructure. Enter the kamiks, traditional Inuit boots, handcrafted from sealskin or caribou. To a modern eye, they look simple. No rubber, no insulation, no aggressive tread. But don't let appearances fool you. Kamiks are multi-layered machines, breathable, flexible, and shockingly waterproof. The outer layer, made from oil-treated sealskin, repels water like Teflon. Inside, a removable liner, often made from dry, fluffed caribou hair or grass, absorbs moisture from the foot throughout the day. At night, the liner is removed, aired, or swapped, giving the system time to dry completely. Compare that to most modern winter boots, sealed synthetic insulation, rubber soles, and zero airflow. Once moisture enters, it stays. You sweat, you freeze, but kamiks breathe. They allow microevaporation, wick sweat into removable liners, and prevent internal freezing. And here's the kicker, they're nearly silent. For hunters moving across snow and ice, sound matters. The softness of sealskin, combined with the absence of hard soles, lets them walk across brittle surfaces without crunch, crackle, or echo. Modern boots amplify your presence. Comics erase it. But what's even more brilliant is how modular they are. Different liners for different seasons. Multiple fits depending on task, hunting versus hauling versus staying stationary. And the entire system could be repaired in the field, using thread carried in the belt or spare sinew stored in the boot cuff. That's not convenient, that's zero failure engineering. Most modern boots use adhesives that fail under -70 degrees Fahrenheit. Comics use hand stitching, angled, overlapping, with seam treatments made from animal oil or even blood-based glues. These seams flex, bend, and contract with the body and environment. And like the rest of Inuit clothing, kamiks were tailored to the wearer. A hunter's pair might curve forward for efficiency and stride. A child's pair might be made shorter, with an extra ankle wrap for warmth. Nothing was generic, nothing was disposable, and everything could be traced, by stitch, by shape, back to the person who made them. Gore-Tex boots boast about lab tests. Kamiks prove it in the field. In the coldest places on Earth, you don't need more features, you need a better understanding. And the Inuit understood that your feet aren't just how you move, they're how you return home. Which is why their boots weren't shoes, they were promises. Now, if we've seen how every piece of Inuit clothing maximizes protection, let's talk about the one thing modern brands can't replicate. Why has no one caught up? By now, it's clear. Inuit clothing works, not just well, but better than much of what modern science has built. So here's the uncomfortable question: why hasn't anyone copied it? The materials exist, the principles are understood, the climate still demands solutions, and yet, no major outdoor brand has truly recreated Inuit gear. Why? Because Inuit design isn't based on aesthetics, branding, or even profit margins. It's based on lived wisdom, observations made over generations, encoded into garments that are adaptable, local, and precise. And that doesn't scale well. You can't patent a pattern passed from grandmother to granddaughter. You can't package humility. You can't mass-produce craftsmanship. Western companies have tried superficially. Faux fur trims, parkas named Arctic Expedition, 1,200 jackets with animal names stitched on the sleeve. But the truth is, they missed the why. They copied the shape, not the soul. Inuit clothing isn't just a product, it's a philosophy of design. Every part must serve multiple purposes. Every material must be repurposed. Every stitch must account for failure. Its design is without ego. And in a world obsessed with innovation, that kind of wisdom gets overlooked. Not because it doesn't work, but because it doesn't wear the right costume. It doesn't come with startup decks. It doesn't shout for attention. It just works. And maybe that's the lesson, that in the race to engineer the future, we ignored those who had already solved it. That in our obsession with complexity, we missed the elegance of survival. And that true innovation, the kind that keeps you alive when it's -70 degrees Fahrenheit, doesn't always come from silicon or satellites. Sometimes it comes from sinew, from fur, from memory, from listening to people who were never trying to invent the future. They were just trying to see the next sunrise, and they did for thousands of years. Maybe it's time we ask them how. By now, we've seen how Inuit clothing is engineered for survival, but to stop there would be missing half the story. Because these garments didn't just protect bodies, they communicated identities. Every stitch, every cut, every color told a story. Not always in words, but in code, one understood instinctively by the community. A girl's amounti wasn't the same as a woman's. A boy's parka differed from a hunter's, not just in size, but in structure, trim, and purpose. You could tell from across the tundra whether someone was married, had children, or was entering adulthood, simply by how their clothing was shaped. The curve of a sleeve might suggest age. The style of a hood might indicate origin. And then there were the details, so small you'd miss them unless you were raised to see. Embroidered edging with family motifs, beaded cuffs stitched with patterned blessings, protection from wind spirits, from illness, from misfortune. These weren't ornamental. They were functional prayers. A hunter might wear a small triangular stitch over the chest, a nod to ancestors, or to a successful kill from the season before. Sometimes a parka would be made with ceremonial intent, not for wearing, but for burial. And these designs weren't fixed. They evolved with the person. A young girl's amounti might be playful in color, but as she matured, she'd create her own, choosing patterns passed from her mother, her aunts, her memory. Garments became biographies, and crafting them wasn't a task, it was a rite. Girls learned to sew as a gateway to womanhood. Boys were taught to understand construction, not just to survive, but to appreciate the labor behind the life-saving systems they wore. In this way, clothing became cultural glue. It bound generations. It honored elders. It reminded people that survival was a communal act, not an individual one. Even when the materials changed, when cloth was traded or zippers introduced, the cultural code remained embedded in the logic. Form followed tradition. Tradition followed function, and function always followed life. Because to wear Inuit clothing was to declare something silently. I am not alone. I come from somewhere. I carry more than myself, and in the coldest places on earth. Sometimes that kind of warmth is the most important of all. We live in a world obsessed with progress, faster gear, smarter fabrics, newer tech, but maybe what we need, it isn't to push further forward. Maybe what we need is to look backward with respect, because the Inuit didn't just survive the Arctic, they decoded it. They built systems with no manuals, fashioned tools from nothing, and created garments so effective, so elegant, so sustainable that even today's best gear can't match them. They didn't have labs. They had memory. They had a story. They had a relationship with the land that was humble, precise, and reciprocal. And that's something the modern world still struggles to learn, that the best designs don't come from dominating nature. They come from listening to it, from asking, what does the cold want? What can the body do? How do we stay alive, not just alone, but together? Inuit clothing isn't just about insulation, it's about intention. A worldview stitched into fabric, a design system born not in factories, but in families. And if you've made it this far, if you've listened, wondered, and maybe even felt something stir inside, we'd love to invite you into ours. This channel isn't just a place to watch. It's a small family of people who believe in deep stories, quiet genius, and wisdom that lasts longer than logos. And if you've watched all the way to the end, consider subscribing to join our small Inuit family. Until next time, stay curious and stay warm.